I never thought my life could take such a wild turn over something as simple as an envelope in the mail. It was New Year's Eve, and like most people, I was at home reflecting on the past year, a year that, quite frankly, felt like a series of disappointments. I was sitting in my tiny, one-bedroom apartment in Indianapolis, staring at the peeling paint on the walls and wondering how I'd let things get this bad. Bills were piling up, my job as a delivery driver barely covered rent, and I couldn't even afford to visit my family in Ohio for the holidays. That's when I heard the faint slap of something hitting my mailbox downstairs. Probably just another late Christmas card, I thought. But when I walked down the creaky stairs and opened the metal mailbox, there it was, a plain white envelope with no return address, no name, just my apartment number scrawled on the front in messy handwriting. Curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open right there in the dimly lit hallway. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills, so thick it barely fit in the envelope. My heart started pounding. For a second, I thought maybe I'd stumbled into some kind of drug deal. But there was more. Under the cash were a few photographs. The photos showed a man and a woman in their late 30s, sitting at what looked like a fancy outdoor cafe. They were smiling at the camera, holding glasses of wine. I didn't recognize them at all. There was also a note, written on a torn piece of notebook paper. It read, "For everything. Thank you." That's it. No names, no explanation, nothing. I rushed back up to my apartment, locked the door, and sat on my ratty couch, staring at the envelope like it might explode. My hands were shaking as I spread out the money on the coffee table. I started counting. 100. 200. 1,000. 10,000. 20,000. By the time I reached the end, my jaw was on the floor. $100,000. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every possible scenario in my head. What if someone realized they sent it to the wrong person? What if this was some kind of test? What if the people in the photos were mobsters, and I was about to get caught up in something dangerous? But as the hours ticked by, no one knocked on my door. No one called. The next morning, I made up my mind. The money wasn't meant for me, but there was no way I was giving it back. The first thing I did after deciding to keep the money was panic. I mean, I had no idea what to do with $100,000 just sitting in my apartment. What if someone broke in? What if the person who sent it realized their mistake and came looking for it? I stuffed the cash back into the envelope, shoved it into my backpack, and headed out to find a bank. Walking through downtown Indianapolis that morning felt surreal. The cold January air bit at my face, but I barely noticed. Everything seemed sharper, the sound of cars passing by, the glint of sunlight off the icy streets, even the way the old man at the coffee cart smiled at me as I walked past. It was like I was carrying this massive secret, and it made the world feel different. I ended up at a branch of a local credit union, where I opened a new savings account. The teller, a cheerful woman named Amy, didn't bat an eye when I handed her the cash. I told her it was from an inheritance, technically not a lie, I reasoned, since I had inherited it from someone, even if they didn't know it. Amy congratulated me, and as she counted the money, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, hope. But here's where things started getting weird. On my way home, I stopped at a small diner called Margie's, a place I'd passed a million times but never actually gone into. It was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and faded menus that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 80s. I just wanted a coffee, but as I sat there sipping it, a man slid into the booth across from me. He was in his 40s, maybe, with a salt and pepper beard and a leather jacket that looked expensive. His name was Tom, I know because he introduced himself like we were old friends. "I think you've got something that belongs to me," he said, smiling like he was sharing an inside joke. My heart stopped. Was he talking about the money? The envelope? I played dumb. Sorry, I think you've got the wrong guy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom leaned back, still smiling, but his eyes were sharp. Maybe. Or maybe you're the luckiest guy in the world, and you just don't know it yet. He stood up, dropped a $20 bill on the table, and walked out without another word. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car that passed my apartment, every stranger I saw on the street, made my skin crawl. I didn't leave my place for 2 days. But nothing happened. No one came knocking. No mysterious man in a leather jacket appeared outside my window. Slowly, I convinced myself that Tom was just some random guy messing with me. Still, his words stuck with me, maybe you're the luckiest guy in the world. As the days passed, my anxiety over the money slowly started to settle, until I realized something. My bank balance was growing, but not in the way I expected. I had opened the savings account on a whim, not planning on touching the money anytime soon. But that's when I remembered what most people were talking about in the news: cryptocurrency. I had always dismissed it as some kind of fad, but my curiosity started eating away at me. The more I looked into it, the more I saw how quickly people were making a fortune. Bitcoin, Ethereum, hell, even Dogecoin had made some random guy a millionaire. Why not me? So, I did what felt like the most reckless thing I'd ever done. I transferred $20,000 into a crypto exchange account and bought Bitcoin. Then, without thinking too much, I bought some Ethereum and a few other altcoins. It was a risk, but I figured I had nothing to lose. The first few days were terrifying. I checked my crypto portfolio constantly, watching the prices jump up and down, feeling my heart race every time it dipped. But then something incredible happened. Bitcoin surged. Over the course of just a few weeks, the value of my investments went up, way up. I started watching my balance grow, and it felt like something surreal. The initial $20,000 I'd put in was already sitting at $60,000. I thought it was a fluke, but then the market kept climbing. By the end of the month, my portfolio was worth $150,000. That's when I realized, I wasn't just lucky. This was real. And I could keep pushing it. With the new cash flow, I started to feel like I was in control of my life for the first time in ages. I stopped worrying about rent, about paying bills, about the future. I even let myself splurge a little, bought a modest used car, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I hadn't owned a car in years, and I'll admit, driving it around felt like I was on top of the world. But the real shift came when I decided to use more of the money. I didn't just sit on it. I opened a small, independent shop in the middle of downtown, a used bookshop cafe, a place where people could hang out and read, grab a coffee, maybe chat with a local. It was my dream. It wasn't anything huge, but it felt like mine. My own little piece of the world. That shop became my new obsession. I didn't hire a ton of people, just a few staff members, but I ran everything myself. The more I put into it, the more I saw it grow. Word of mouth spread, and slowly but surely, people started coming in. Then, things started to go wild again. One evening, I checked my crypto balance, just as a habit, and saw something that nearly made me fall off my chair. The value of my portfolio had hit $500,000. I hadn't even noticed it happening. It was like I blinked, and suddenly, I had a small fortune sitting in my bank account. At this point, I couldn't believe my luck. But even with all that money, it was still surreal. My shop was doing better than I ever expected. People came in every day, and I had regulars, some for the coffee, others for the books. The whole vibe was different now, like everything in my life was finally clicking into place. I felt like I was living in a dream. But of course, when things seem perfect, that's when life likes to throw curveballs. It started with a phone call. I was at the shop, standing behind the counter, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. At first, I thought it was some scam or telemarketer, but something told me I should answer. I picked up, and a woman's voice greeted me, her tone sharp but polite. "Is this Jason Cooper?" she asked. "Yeah, this is him." "Who's this?" I replied, trying to mask the edge of curiosity in my voice. "My name's Linda," she said. "I think you're the person who received the package on New Year's Eve." My stomach dropped. I could barely breathe as I listened. Linda explained that she worked for a private investigator, someone hired to track down a sum of money that had been mistakenly sent out. The money, she said, belonged to a family business that had recently fallen into trouble, and there had been some kind of clerical error. The photos, she explained, were of the business partners who were still looking for the cash. She told me that the family wasn't out to hurt me, but they needed the money back. I tried to keep calm as she spoke, but the more she said, the more I realized, this wasn't just some random mistake. The family's business was in deep financial trouble, and the $100,000 I'd received wasn't some gift. It was the last of their assets, sent out by mistake. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice almost trembling. Linda paused. "Well, it's up to you. We can arrange for you to send the money back, or you can choose to keep it. But understand, there will be consequences. The family is, well, they don't take kindly to things being messed up." I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I had everything I'd ever wanted, all because of a single, life-changing mistake. But now it felt like I was sitting on a ticking time bomb. Would these people come after me? Was I in too deep? The next day, I went to the shop and tried to push all of that out of my mind. I poured myself into the business, but the worry was gnawing at me. I even thought about returning the money, sending it back, walking away. But then I thought about what I'd built. Would I give it all up for a few $100,000? Or was this finally my shot at something bigger? I spent the next few days in a haze, torn between paranoia and exhilaration. Every car that drove past my shop, every customer who walked in, felt like they were part of a greater story I didn't fully understand. The weight of that phone call was crushing me, and no matter how much I tried to stay focused, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Then, a week later, it did. I was behind the counter, refilling a coffee machine when the bell above the door jingled. I glanced up and froze. There, standing in the doorway, was a man in a black suit. He looked out of place in my little bookshop cafe, but it wasn't his attire that caught my attention, it was his eyes. Cold, calculating, like he could see right through me. I instantly knew, this wasn't a customer. He walked in slowly, surveying the place with a look that seemed almost disdainful. I could hear my heart beating in my chest. Was this one of them? One of the people from that family? "Can I help you?" I managed to ask, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there for a moment, his gaze flickering around the room as if measuring everything. The quiet hum of the cafe, the sound of a couple chatting in the corner, it all felt distant, muffled. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and smooth, with an edge that made me feel like I was in the presence of something dangerous. "You've been a very lucky man, Jason Cooper. The question is, how much longer do you think your luck will last?" My blood ran cold. His tone was casual, but I could tell it was anything but. There was something behind his words that made me realize just how much trouble I was in. "I don't know what you mean," I stammered, but I could feel my palms sweating. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know exactly what I mean." He glanced down at the counter, where I had carelessly left my phone. "You've got something that belongs to my employers. And they want it back." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My throat went dry, and for a moment, all I could think about was how stupid I had been. All of this, my success, my business, the car I had bought, had come at the expense of someone else's mistake. And now, it seemed, I was about to pay the price. Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His smile didn't falter. "You can call me Frank. And I'm here to make sure you understand what happens when people make mistakes with money that doesn't belong to them." He turned and started walking toward the door, but paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Jason. We're not interested in hurting you. But we do expect that money back. And soon." With that, he was gone. That I spent the entire night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. The money was never really mine, was it? It was a mistake, a fluke, and now it was clear, I was in over my head. Frank's visit made that much obvious. They weren't playing games, and I wasn't going to get away with it unscathed. I had to make a decision. And quickly. I thought about returning the money. Walking away. Telling the authorities about the mix-up. But everything I'd built in the past few months, the shop, the car, the freedom, was because of that $100,000. Could I really give it up? Could I risk losing everything I'd worked for? I knew deep down what I should do, but the thought of letting go of all I had was unbearable. So, instead, I decided to take another gamble. The next morning, I went to my shop early. The streets were still empty, the city quiet. I had an idea, one that could give me leverage. I called Linda, the woman from the private investigator's office, hoping she might offer some clarity. She answered almost immediately, as though she had been waiting for my call. "I'm sorry," I said, not sure how to start. "I don't want any trouble, but I can't just give up the money. It's changed my life." She didn't judge me. In fact, her response surprised me. "I know," she said softly. "But you've crossed a line, Jason. And now, you have to make a choice. You don't know what kind of people you're dealing with." "I want to make things right," I said, the weight of the decision finally settling in. "I'll return it. But I need to do it on my terms. I won't just be a pawn in their game." Linda paused for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, almost reluctant. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 12th and Stone. 2 p.m. Don't bring anyone. And Jason, be careful." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and terror. I had no idea what was going to happen when I walked into that warehouse, but I knew one thing for sure, my life was about to change again. At 2 p.m., I drove to the warehouse. It was a dilapidated building, long abandoned, surrounded by broken windows and cracked pavement. I parked my car a block away, the last thing I wanted was to be seen, and walked the rest of the way on foot. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the air felt thick with tension. When I reached the entrance, Linda was waiting for me. She looked exactly as she had on the phone, calm and professional, but something in her eyes told me she was just as nervous as I was. "Give me the envelope," she said, holding out her hand. I hesitated for a second before pulling it from my jacket. The cash felt heavier now than it had that night I'd first opened it. I handed it to her, and she gave me a long, scrutinizing look. "You're lucky. They're willing to let this go. But don't ever think about pulling something like this again." I nodded, my throat tight. Just as I started to turn to leave, Linda stopped me. "Jason," she called. I turned back, waiting. "You're not the only one who's been lucky. This money, it was always meant for you. They've got bigger problems now, and for what it's worth, you did the right thing." I didn't know what to say to that. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. I had given up everything I had gained, but I also realized something. The experience had changed me. I knew now what it was like to have something more than I'd ever dreamed of, to have tasted success and felt the weight of responsibility. And maybe that was enough. When I started my car and pulled out of the parking lot, I felt a shift inside me. My future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, I would never forget how quickly everything can change. From the envelope that arrived on New Year's Eve, to the shop, the money, and the choices I'd made, I had lived more in the last few months than I had in years. And maybe that was the real gift.